Welcome to the True Commercial Real Estate Podcast, your ultimate investor resource for all things truly commercial. Whether you're interested in industrial, retail, medical office, storage, single tenant, or any other type of non-residential real estate investment, this is your podcast.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the True Commercial Real Estate Podcast with me, Aurélien, and my co-host, Logan. We are really excited to have you tonight. We are really excited about the episode today. We will be discussing triple net leases, single tenant with our guest, Nancy Miller. So thank you, Nancy, for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you. You're with the Bull Realty, and as I understand it, I've watched a few videos with you as a guest. Your specialty is net lease, single tenants. Could you please tell us more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you all for having me. And you all have a very interesting background, each and every one of you. I got started as an investor myself by never selling the first place I lived in. And I wound up having some residential rental property over the years. And I wound up getting my license, and I did other things. I worked for AT&T and did a whole bunch of things, but I kept the rental property along the way. And I bought and sold a little bit and did a 1031 exchange. And after 9/11, I had a career change to make, and I was going to go to Europe to teach marketing, actually. And I ran into someone here in Atlanta who was the owner of Bull Realty, and he said, "Come work for me." And I knew him from when we were very young, in our 20s, when he was doing apartment property management. And we chatted, and that was 20 years ago almost. And I, over the years, have tried to turn in my plungers for a lazy boy, as they say. So all of you who have the residential rental property, I understand and feel for you, and still manage about eight of my own residential units, and my partner manages four office condos, and then I have a couple other partners. We have some single tenant properties out of state. So that's how I got started in this. And then after many years, I started, when I did a 1031 exchange, I bought a Dollar General several years ago, and I kind of broke the code on those, on what happens and who the developers are and what's going on. And I said, this is not so bad. And I migrated from selling apartment buildings and selling multifamily and selling a little bit of industrial and selling a lot of retail strip centers to the last 8 or 9 years, really focusing on single tenant properties. And that's the end of the story.
Thank you.
Phenomenal.
And the beginning of our interview.
There you go.
So, very high level, can you please define for us what net lease is, triple net, double net, single tenant,
Sure.
all those concepts, please?
Basically, the landlord is taking a more passive role. Single tenant net lease today is really comprised of a double net and a triple net. And in a double net lease, the landlord may have some exposure or responsibility for something like roof structure, parking lot, maybe paying some of the bills and getting reimbursed from the tenant. The triple net concept, or you sometimes hear it as absolute triple net, that concept is that I am totally hands off. The tenant gets the tax bills, the tenant gets the utility bills, and so forth, and they pay them directly. So I'm really a very passive investor at that point. And that's really the distinction. There's some variations on the themes as leases over time change and migrate with certain tenants, but that's the basic concept.
Thank you. And who are the typical tenants in for those leases?
Well, they can vary across the board. Some of you all have industrial properties, and you could be an industrial tenant. You could be a medical tenant from anything from for example, a dock in the box, an urgent care, a large hospital chain. You can also be Home Depot. You could be their distribution center, which is going to be massive, or an Amazon distribution center, and so forth. Or you could be a very small single tenant fast food, which we call QSR, or you could be an AutoZone, or you could be a Wendy's, or you could be a casual dining, or a Steak and Shake, or an Outback. You could be a 7-Eleven, a gas station. So any of those kinds of properties that have the characteristic of being a one tenant on one piece of property, they could be across the board, any type of tenant. And of course, the responsibilities of the landlord and the responsibilities of the tenant are going to vary based upon what you're dealing with.
Thank you. And so talking about cap rates now, so they vary according to perceived risk and return. Which tenants among those tenants you just listed are perceived as more risky versus less risky?
Well, that's an interesting question. Risk is not only the type of the tenant, it's a national credit tenant that is strong, let's say a Starbucks or a Home Depot or anything, or a Walgreens. Those tenants, though they're very strong, they could close a location. So risk, even with a large corporate tenant, is there. If they do close it, likely they're going to continue to pay the rent. But there's also risk associated with some tenants are franchise operators versus corporate run. So a lot of your McDonald's, a lot of your Wendy's, a lot of your various, all kinds of tenants, Aaron Rents, for example, they are franchise operations. Zaxby's is going to primarily a franchise model. So what you have to be cautious of is, if I'm a franchise operator and I own one store, even though I may be a franchise of McDonald's or a franchise of Zaxby's, who are well thought of brands, that risk is only as strong as I, as the operator, am. So if I'm a small operator learning the business versus an operator that might have dozens of locations, there's risk there. So you really have to peel the onion back and determine if it's a corporate or a franchise. And with a franchise, you're generally going to get a little bit better or higher cap rate because there's a slight amount of risk associated with it. And also, if it's a double net versus a triple net lease, you're likely to get a little bit higher cap rate as well. I give an example sometimes of Wendy's. When I caution people about buying a franchise, they may say, oh, that Wendy's is a franchise. And I'll say, well, how strong are they? I don't know. They own 2 locations. And then I might say, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because Wynn Foods out of Michigan is a Wendy's franchisee. By the way, they own 600 Wendy's and they're on the New York Stock Exchange. So they'd be a pretty strong tenant as well. So you have to do your research, your homework.
Yeah, that was my question around that. So you say franchises are usually the higher cap rates. Are there other types of tenants that are up there in terms of cap rates?
Well, again, I think the cap rate is a function of a couple things. If it's a local tenant, a one-off tenant that's down the street, that is let's say a burger place or a car wash, and they're just one location and they're not national, they're going to be a higher cap rate and higher risk. If I look at a tenant that is, in multiple locations and has good fundamentals of real estate, but they're, maybe they have a few locations. It really, again, gets back to what you think would be what their sales are and you have to assess their risk. Same thing, a lot of you own industrial. The same thing holds true with industrial and so forth. I'm not sure I can quite answer your question a little bit without any refining it more, but it always depends on the level of the particular tenant. It depends on the term of the lease. If it's a short lease where it might have 3 to 5 years remaining on it versus a tenant that has 10 years or 15 years remaining, obviously the tenant with a shorter term of lease is more risk. In the shopping center world, which Courtney and some of the other folks are familiar with, those leases are usually shorter. They're 3-year or 5-year leases, but you have multiple tenants, so you're spreading your risk. But in the single tenant net lease world, you have only, one tenant. So if they're in there for a short period of time, you have to be cautious. I have a client right now that has he owns a Dollar General in Louisiana, and he only has 3 years left on the lease. Well, typically Dollar General leases are 10 to 15 years. So we're going to put it on the market, and we were concerned because of the short term of the lease. However, he's getting something called percentage rent, and it's an old style lease where he gets a percentage of the sales over a certain threshold. We don't see those anymore, but this store is doing $2.2 million a year in sales, which is enormous for the size of the town. So last year, on top of his rent, he got a separate check from them for 20 grand. So he did really well. So I might say to you, a 3-year lease sounds very short in the dollar store world, but if I add that component of the uniqueness of his lease, it suddenly becomes very interesting. And I take the risk of the question mark is, will Dollar General renew? And they have 3 5-year options beyond this. Will they renew? If I take the risk and say, yeah, they'll renew, it's a home run. I hit it out of the park as an investor.
Thank you. And in terms of lending, what is the typical loan to value one can get from a lender to purchase such property?
Well, that's a function of several things. One is obviously the strength of the borrower, also the strength of the property, the tenant strength, and the term of the lease. If I have 3 years left on a lease, I'm going to have a harder time than if I have 5, 10, or 15 years remaining on the lease. So it's going to depend on those things. In the single tenant net lease world, there are specialty lenders that are very familiar with this type of lending. So often people think, oh, I'll just go to my local bank, and I'm looking, if I'm here in Atlanta and I want to buy something in Dallas, my local bank here has no interest in funding a loan in another state. They just don't. So I have to go to these specialty lenders. There's some exceptions to that. But typically, I'm going to have to put 30 to 40% down on that loan. And the lender will offer me some options. He'll offer maybe a 5, a 7, or a 10-year balloon on a 25-year or a 30-year amortization, which is a long time. And obviously the goal with my clients is cash flow. So the longer I can amortize something out over a longer period of time, the higher the cash flow. The problem we face today is as cap rates have declined, so my cap rate or my return is lower. Let's say a year or two ago, it might have been a 6.5% or 7% cap rate on a property. That same property today might be a 5.5% or 6% return. So now I get a lower return, but though the interest rates are favorable today, they were in the high 2s and in the low 3s. Now interest rates are going up. They're in the high 3s and low 4s in my world. So the gap between return and interest rate is narrowing, which means my cash flow is narrowing. And so what I have to do to overcome that is to try to find higher cap rate properties or put more money down. So instead of that 30% or 40% down or 60, 70% loan to value, I might have to put 40 or 50% down to make the deal make sense. And the other thing that helps a lot in this is to look for a lease that has rent increases over time. Tractor Supply, for example, is a great tenant. They have a 15-year lease, but their rent bumps don't occur till way out there. A fast food restaurant might have rent bumps every 5 years. A franchise of a fast food might have rent bumps every year and a half. So why that's important is the sooner I have a rent bump, the higher my yield is or my income is, so that my cash flow improves sooner over time when I have increases, especially when I have a fixed debt service. That's a long-winded answer. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, thank you. Lots of information in that answer. Thank you, Nancy. And I'm going to turn it over to Logan.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that. As you're going through these properties, each property is different. So the due diligence that I'll take someone through for an industrial property is a little bit different than it is through, a retail building or an office building. So how do you help your clients through that due diligence process, and what does it look like for these properties?
Well, that's really, really important. And what I try to do is before I put a property under contract, I try to peel that onion back sooner. Often we won't get the opportunity to look at a lease until we're under an LOI or under contract. But I think it's really important to ask the tough questions up front to help your client do that. And you want to, again, look at the strength of the tenant, as we've talked about. You want to make sure there's no early termination clauses in there that you're not aware of. You want to make sure that there are no legal issues or encroachments or easement issues or there's maybe an eminent domain that may be happening. I've had all kinds of things we find at the last minute that there's a fence on the property. You want to look at the environmentals, especially those of you who specialize in the industrial world. I'm speaking to the choir. You've got to be very, very careful about making sure that there is no former no-nos, that the property has got a clean phase one, or if a phase two is needed, find out what's there. We recently had a situation where it was a Family Dollar in Atlanta, and it looked like I sold it new construction, looked great. My client's had it for 5 years. He said, let's sell it. Okay. We give the buyer a phase one, and we say to the buyer, here you go. Well, the buyer comes back to us and says, by the way, what we found out was about 2 months after my client bought it, there was a 3,000-gallon release at the Texaco across the street. And no one told, the EPD did not contact the neighbors. So we had to unravel that problem after the fact. And so one of the things I did in that is I became very involved with the old environmental firm who kind of screwed up, basically. They hid this, and we got an environmental attorney involved. We got a new environmental firm who specializes, it works with Quick Trip and Raceway and Racetrack and so forth. So we had to unravel this and I had to get a very fast education in all of this to help us get through this. And that was a mess, but we closed it about a month ago. And so the broker does a lot of things along the way. We help find lenders. We help find 1031 intermediaries. We look at stuff and try to make sense of things that on surface, a broker will typically say, this is a triple net property. And the next thing you know is we find out, well, who's responsible for the roof? Oh, the landlord. Oh, who's responsible for the parking lot? Oh, the landlord. And how old is that roof? oh, it's only 15 years old. Okay. And so forth. So you have to really advocate, and the more homework you do up front as investors, you probably all know this, and it's the tiniest detail that will catch you, and you really need to pay attention to that. For example, you might have a lease that has increases based upon CPI, consumer price index. Well, find out what's been happening with that, and just know what you're getting into. So I could continue on forever on that topic. So I'll stop there, Logan.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. No, I was going to ask questions about environmental. We covered that. I guess you covered a lot of the different ways that you look for or you do your due diligence for your clients. So one of the questions.
May I interrupt? And just on the environmental topic,
please do.
I think that all of you who are investing, if the seller does not have an environmental, and you think, well, it was farmland before, or it was whatever, no matter what, get an environmental assessment, whether it's just a simple assessment or a phase one. But I would never, ever buy anything, even a multi-tenant residential property, without having that assurance. It's key, because you'll walk into a landmine unknowingly. So I just offer that up.
No, that's great advice. We offer that to even tenants who are looking to sign a lease on a building that's going to be a long-term lease where they're going to set up shop. Is you want to know what's there beforehand. So the landlord 5 years from now, if they decide to sell it and there's a phase one happening, they can't say, hey, this was your fault. You did this in the meantime. Right. So no, that's great advice. That's great advice. One of the questions we had was about the physical shape of the building, and not shape, but how. How, any deferred maintenance, so on and so forth. How important is that? And I guess a sub question to that would be, will these national credit tenants allow someone to buy something, fix it up for them, and place them there, or are they looking for pretty much Class A ready to go property?
Well, if you're having a national credit tenant in there, let's say it's they're repurposing the space. That tenant will think about Starbucks. That's easy for us to all relate to. Starbucks has their own floor plan, their own setup, their own way to do the counters, this, that, and the other. So they may go into a vanilla space that was something else. It might have been a cell phone store in the past. They may go in there, and they may come to you as the landlord and say, I want you to give me X amount of tenant improvement or TI money to build this out. And in turn, you'd amortize what you spent. Let's say you spend $100,000 or $200,000. That would get amortized and paid back to you in terms of the lease over time. So that's one way people improve space. The other thing is, if a tenant, if you find a tenant who is interested in a space and it's really terrible, you shouldn't avoid the space necessarily, but what you want to do is make sure that the real estate fundamentals of that property, if you or the tenant are going to spend money on that, it may need a new roof. It may need repaving the parking lot. But if that property has the real estate fundamentals, which a few of them that come to mind include ease of access, sufficient parking, ease of visibility and signage, traffic counts that are proper for that type of business. If it has, demographics that will be suitable for that type of tenant, you could buy a dog of a property and bring in a tenant. Let's say somebody just neglected a property, and you think, boy, all the housing starts around here. Things are great. They're building new apartments. And what do you think? Sherwin-Williams. So you may take that situation and take, as I say, I won't say this word on Zoom, but take chicken with an S and make a chicken salad. and you can make a lot of money improving a property, and that's one way that you enrich it and so forth. But it's going to take some knowing, and one of y'all is a developer on the call. You know what it takes to make sure you do something and do it right. But from the standpoint of buying a net lease property, as a general comment, since it's usually mostly the responsibility of the tenant, a lot of times I have investors who never even fly to see the property. I know you find that hard to believe, but between Google and between all the other options and reviewing the lease and knowing the credit of the tenant, people don't go traveling across the country, even pre-COVID, to look at a property. Many of them do not. If it's a very straightforward thing, but you should, because you'll see some things. We had a mattress firm that we looked at in North Carolina a couple years back. On paper, it looked great. On Google Earth, it looked great. But when they drove to the property, here's the street level, and the property was down in the valley. So you could hardly see the signage. You had to go some crazy way to get in there. So the ingress and egress was awful. And you wouldn't have found that out unless you physically visited that property.
Wow. That's unbelievable. So it looks like there are value add opportunities though in this space. Then, it kind of leads us to that, one of the quite oftentimes investors are looking for that value add,
Yeah.
A lot of us specifically are not, we're not buying the Class A property that was just developed we're
Right.
not managing
Right.
large funds. We're looking for value add properties.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak to that in this space?
Yeah.
The value add look like?
Yeah, I think that in your particular town that you live in, there are probably areas that are regentrifying and emerging. And I would keep an eye on those areas. And I would look at areas that have a lot of maybe vacancy right now. And I would look and see if there's some parks or some investment in the area that makes sense. And then go and take a look at what are any of those possible vacancies repurposable? And probably the answer is yes, but then the question is the timing. So you may say to yourself, I know, because I've lived here for X number of years, I know that strip or that corner or that whatever is going to have value. So the question is, do you tie it up now and buy it and just pay the tax and pay the insurance and keep it boarded up until 3 years from now, some larger property or some larger development comes by and builds a new strip or does something, or a school nearby. So if you have the pockets, the deep pockets to do that, or hopefully you buy it right, then that's what I would do in advance. But look ahead and see what's happening in your particular area. And the other thing that I have done with folks that it works out fairly well is I've bought a few properties with partners. And I have a 5-unit apartment building in Midtown Atlanta. I bought it maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And, I have hardly a mortgage on it right now. And I'm getting offers, like insane offers for it. My partner is a minority partner. I'm a 66%. He's a 33%. So he leaves me alone and I manage it. And I have the same partner, a 50-50 on something else. And then I'm a 20% partner in a Dollar Tree in a very small town in Alabama. And I'm a 40% partner in a Title Max, if you've ever heard of them, outside of Columbia, South Carolina. So, some people run part of it, but you can take, pool your money with other people that you know and trust. And it gives you more bench strength to buy a larger property. A client I'm working with today, he has a partner, he's a doctor, and his wife, and they took in a partner to buy an Applebee's, actually. And That's another long story, but they pooled their monies together, and it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it definitely seems, we already talked a little bit about residential and how much of a pain that can be. You're saying you've got properties all over the place. It definitely seems like this is the single tenant net, especially when you get to the triple net, an absolute triple net. It seems like a lot more passive. Is that kind of why you hear in the industry the lingo called mailbox money, or is that yeah. Is that what you?
Yes. The phrase goes, there ain't no free lunch. So it's not totally, without issues. You always have something going on. But by and large, with your net lease properties, I have a client who has a Family Dollar here in Atlanta that is a double net Family Dollar. And we put it on the market, and it has maybe 9 years left on the lease. And it also is getting percentage rent. But he just now, to sell it, had to repave the parking lot. He's got some other issues with an old HVACs. He's got to, get the coil changed on this one and do this, that, and the other. And so he's also a very, very highly skilled cardiologist that specializes in anesthesiology. So he keeps the open heart patient alive. And here he is dealing with paving contractors and this and that and the other. So, you've got that issue, and with the triple net properties, some of them where you do nothing in today's world, since the demand and the supply, demand is high, the supply is low. Landlords who are sellers now are getting crazy, insane low cap rates. So if I'm going to buy something that is mailbox money that I don't do anything with, I'm going to probably pay for it dearly, literally, to have a long lease and do nothing. And hopefully at the end of the line, there's some value and opportunity for resaleability of that property.
Kind of a sub question to that, for those who may want to get something that might be a little bit more hands-on, is there property management for this type of asset class?
There are some companies who will manage client portfolios of dollar stores and so forth. A lot of investors started many years ago, and now their families are involved in it. And so some of the family members are helping in the management and upkeep, and having family offices. Obviously, we see more property management in the multi-tenant world, where you have, property management companies that will either manage their own or other people's properties. I had a property manager manage that 5-unit building that I mentioned to you several years ago. They managed it for a couple of years because I was traveling a lot, and it seemed to be the right thing to do. Every week I got a call from my tenants, and they complained about this or complained about that with the management company, where they were saying, I'm calling the Better Business Bureau. So in that particular case, I ultimately took back my own self-management. But there could be opportunities if you specialize in a property type, like one of y'all is in Charlotte. Have to see it, in fact. And you've got a lot of industrial in that market, and there may be smaller industrial landlords who are getting older or don't want to deal with a leaking roof or an electrical problem or a roll up that's not working and so forth. So you could create a niche. And when you start to manage a property, the side benefit of is the owner of the property, the property, so that when they decide, hey, I'm tired of this, I want to sell it, you're first in line. And that's not a bad place to be either. So that's an interesting strategy as well.
Yeah.
But if you have day jobs and full-time jobs as well, you've got to carve that out. And to manage property, you have to check what the real estate legal requirements are in your state, because some of them require, as a property manager, for you to actually work under a someone with a broker's license and so forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the scary things that you hear is about a tenant kind of going dark. It's to throw some more lingo out there. Can you
Right.
talk about that and what that is?
Yes, that going dark could be good or bad. That basically means that they decided to close that store. But if it's a reputable national tenant, that tenant is going to be continuing. They have to honor the lease. I had an interesting situation in Orangeburg, South Carolina, that's worth mentioning. We had a very nice Family Dollar with a 15-year triple net lease, and they had opened the store, and a year and a half later, they come and they want to close the store. It's got 13, years left on it, and they want to close the darn store. And the reason they wanted to close it is because Walmart opened up their neighborhood store concept right down the way, and it just killed their business. Mm-hmm. So rather than keep the store open and as a lost leader, they said, we'll close it. So they were paying their rent like clockwork. So we put it on the market, and we put it on the market with the fact that someone who buys it's got all this cash flow. Of course, Family Dollar came to the landlord several times and said, can we buy out your lease? Can we buy out your lease? And I had calculated the value of getting every one of those rent payments for the rest of the lease term to be about $1.1 million. And they offered them first time $500,000. Then they came back and offered them $700,000. And they kept saying no, because then the landlord is stuck with, he's an older guy, he's stuck with this 8,000 some odd square foot building in an area that'll be hard to re-tenant for a variety of reasons for him, because he lives in Florida and wherever. So we put it on the market as something to collect the rent for as long as you can, and go ahead and figure out, you've got years and years to figure out how you want to repurpose this property. So in that case, the buyer of the property lived in New Jersey, and he had a couple properties in South Carolina. So in this case, he bought it, and Family Dollar came back to him later on and offered him $900,000 to buy out the lease several months later. He said no, because he's still getting his rent and he's waiting, So when he does do something with them, obviously there'll be money there. He's going to have his cake and eat it too, because they're going to give him a buyout. Then he's going to have a new tenant that he's probably going to pay more rent than Family Dollar pays, because they're notoriously pay a lower rental rate. And so he's going to have a win-win. So you can have that situation so long as the tenant is a strong tenant. If it's not a strong tenant and they're weaker and they're going dark because they can't make it, that's a problem. One thing related to this is during this time of COVID, many retail tenants have asked for rent relief. I think across the board, not just in retail, but in casual dining and so forth. So oftentimes what happened was they'll say, I want 3 months of rent relief, meaning no rent. So the landlords would negotiate, okay, I'll give you 3 months of rent, free rent, and we're going to extend your lease at the back end 4 years. So that's a way that everybody won, and a lot of businesses had to do that, or say that they had to have a rent reduction temporarily, and that happens as well.
Well, it's an interesting concept, kind of helping out the tenant, but also that's a great bonus for the landlord as well. So that's phenomenal. So there's a lot going on in these spaces. So somebody who is new, what would be your recommendation for someone who says, okay, this is where I want to go. I want to go down this asset class. where should they start? What recommendations would you give?
Well, Logan, that's a good question too. Didn't follow my own medicine for a long time, but what my broker has told me over time, and I've come to agree with him, is that you have to find the property type or the sector that you like, or you're good at, or you know a lot about, and stay as a specialist. Because if you're a specialist, you know what's happening in your neck of the woods with that property type. You know what the trends are. You know what the technology changes are. You know what the financing is. Like if you're a self-storage person, no one here, surprisingly, is into self-storage or car washes. Those are always cool. But whatever your expertise is, or whatever you think you like, become the go-to and know about it, know what's happening, what's being built, whatever, because that's the way that you build your own personal knowledge and credibility. And along with that, build yourself your personal database so that you know what's happening in your world, so that you can look back and say, well, that was such and such, and this was such and such. And now you have a history that you've created. And I'm looking at the chat. I think somebody's asking a question. I'm going to look at it in a second here. But I would say that the answer to that is specialization, there's a question in the chat, if I may go after it. It says, what happens if a tenant goes bankrupt? Are they able to renegotiate the lease terms if they restructure the debts and stay open? Example, Logan's restaurant went bankrupt, so forth. Our local restaurant closed 3 months back, and now it's open in the same location. Well, Apple Gold is an Applebee's franchise. A client of mine bought an Apple Gold up in Toccoa, Georgia, several years ago with a 1031 exchange. Seemingly, Apple Gold was very strong. It turns out that they started to close several restaurants, and they wound up closing that Applebee's. And it was the only, it's almost a dry county. It was the only place in Toccoa, which is a Bible Belt up there, that had a liquor license. And it closed. But what they did was they negotiated with the landlord, really an insufficient negotiation. I think they paid them 6 months worth of rent. And now there's 9 years left on a lease that the landlord can't get anything from. So the landlord then tries to release it to someone else. So that becomes an issue. And if they can release it, great. And hopefully over time they will be able to release it. And that, bankruptcy is a problem, and one needs to be cautious about that happening. I mean, look at all the doors that were shuttered with all of these large big box firms over the last year or so, the failures. And hopefully none of us on this call will engage or find ourselves in that position. And again, the fundamental thing that I would tell you, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, is to make sure you're always buying good real estate. So if that tenant fails, you've got the fundamentals of access, traffic counts, a decent sized parcel, good bones of that piece of property, because if they were to go dark and go bankrupt, chances are you will have a better shot at finding a backfill and repurposing the property. That's really, rule number one in investing in whatever you do. Just look at the vision of, is this property one that I can repurpose in the future?
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So we have one question left before we jump out into our networking here. Okay. And it's about a specific deal. Can you tell us about any specific deal that was particularly interesting to you? Maybe it's the one you invested in, or somebody who who you've helped invest that was the most interesting deal to you?
Well, there are many, but one I dealt with today, which these investors I have under contract. Today is the last day of due diligence. So if they wanted to get out of it, they had to do it today or they'd lose 50 grand. And this is a casual dining chain. And the appraisal came back about $110,000 short. So they were concerned that the price was higher, and they went back. They came through me and they said, tell the landlord we'll buy it, but they're going to have to reduce the price by $110,000. And I knew how that was going to land. So I said, okay. And they told me the why. They said the roof is old, the parking lot's old, the kitchen needs to be remodeled. And remember, it's a triple net property. It's not their responsibility, but they were using that, that kind of language. And so I said, okay, I'll share this with them. And they sent me the appraisal. And I looked at the appraisal, and I took my own time to look at it. And I found that the comps that they pulled were not really appropriate. They were different markets, not the same demographics. They were not all the same tenant type. And some of the comps were older. They didn't understand that the market's shifted in the last year in the net lease world, where, as I've said, cap rates have really dropped and so forth. So the appraiser, I think, did a horrible job. Now, I'm not a licensed appraiser, so whatever. And so I went back to the seller, and he said, "Listen, I'll, as a goodwill gesture, I'll give them $10,000 off." So in the meantime, I had 2 or 3 other offers on the same property. Other really interested buyers. And one woman was a residential agent out of Alabama who didn't know what she was doing, but she had a buyer. So I had been working with her a week or 2 ago, and I said, here's an LOI. Why don't you do this as a backup? And so today I told her, I went down my list, and I told her, we may have a fallout. Let's get your backup in. So the bottom line is I reworked her backup, and I told her, here's the price it has to be higher than to make it work. Well, they came in $5,000 higher than the existing buyer. And they signed, but at 4:15 today, I sent the seller a backup offer that was better than the original offer of the people that were trying to have us do a priceectomy. And so the original buyer calls me back up because they know that at 5 o'clock, they either do a termination and release or they lose 50 grand. And I sent them a termination and release. And I said, listen, if you need to consider thinking about this, sign this so you don't lose your earnest money. Think about it over the next few days. And by the way, we have 3 additional buyers who are interested in the property and so forth, but we have to show it to them, of course, but we'd like to work with you. Well, when he called me up at 4:15 today, he called me to say, yes, we'll stay with the property. We accept the $10,000 price reduction. And I said, well, you're very lucky because about 15 minutes ago, I got an offer that was better, a higher offer than yours. And he goes, what? And he says, really? And so he was like flipping out because he has partners who are first-time investors, and they're going to all have to dig into their pockets and come up with an additional $100,000 to get the finance, cash down. So that's a long-winded story to say that was crazy, but anyway, that's that.
That's phenomenal. This has been phenomenal. The whole interview has been awesome and super informative. The new terminology that I got out of this that I'm definitely going to adopt in my daily life is, instead of calling it retrade, call it a priceectomy. That's fantastic.
Fine. And all, if somebody tries to deal with your commission, call it a commissionectomy.
There you go. I like
I hate those too.
I like it.
Right.
That's
right.
phenomenal. Aurelian, I'll pass it off to you if you want to take us into the next section of our meeting today.
Sure. Actually, the next section is the Q&A. Just further questions from our audience. This is a podcast, and we have a live audience with us asking questions. So here from Ken, I'm hesitant to buy triple N long-term leases as interest rates are so low as our cap rates for triple N credit tenants, and with interest rate poised to rise, selling these low cap rate properties will result in losses. Is this analysis correct?
Ken, that's correct. The way you get around that, I mean, if you the seller now and you own the property and you bought it at an 8 or 8.5 cap, and you're selling it at a 5.5 cap, you're running to the bank with a big smile. But if you're in the world that you are looking to buy now, the only way that it makes sense, if you're not doing a 1031 exchange to shelter some capital gain, is to try to buy a shorter term lease or buy something that has a little bit more risk, so that you can get your cap rate bumped up to a 7.5% or more. Otherwise, your statement is correct. And by the way, the other thing we didn't talk about is a lot of folks buy these things and they can use depreciation. They can use accelerated depreciation, which is called cost segregation. And so they can, if they have a lot of income and they have a need to write things off faster, these net lease properties offer that, and that may be a strategy where somebody needs to park to write off a lot of money. So they don't care if they're what they're buying it for.
I was wondering about you, Nancy. Are you a leasing agent as well? Do you do leasing?
No, I don't. I've done a little of it in the past, but again, to my comment about the importance of you being a specialist in what you do, there are other people that do that, and that's a real hard job to do, especially when you think about all these office buildings everywhere that are now half empty because of COVID, and everybody's really likes the fact that they can work at home as effectively as they can in the office. I think employers are going to have trouble filling those seats in the future, and so are landlords.
And so we talked about commissions. What are the typical sales commissions?
Net lease property commissions are lower than a lot of land sales. For example, are 8 to 10%. And if you have two sides, you split it. A typical new construction net lease property might be a 4% fee. And if you have another broker involved, you split it. So in my world, you have to have a lot of transactions to make the same money that a broker might make in another specialty. What percent of my sales come from a 1031 exchange? I skipped the question. Wait, where are you seeing 5 to 8 cap rates with national tenants? In Boston, I'm surprised to hear. Yeah, Boston is terrible. California is terrible as well. You can find in some of your dollar stores, you get 5.5 to 6 or 6.5 on a new construction. You'll have to be in a smaller market to do that, but you can find them. I'm listing, for example, a new Dollar Tree in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's going to be a 10-year double net lease. It'll be a brand new inside with $500,000 spent by the tenant, and it'll be about a 6.2% cap rate, for example. And so there are double nets out there that you can find that will be more, a little bit higher cap rates. And what percent of my sales come from 1031 exchanges? I'd say about 30 or 40% of them come from 1031 exchanges. On most loans, the next question is, with leverage, what cash on cash return can you expect? Are most loans non-recourse? You have to play with the numbers on that cash on cash return. Because again, as I mentioned, if you're getting a 5.5 cap and your interest rate is 4%, on that part, you're only making a 1.5% cash on cash. So it depends on you having to put down more cash. And I have an Excel spreadsheet that I plug in numbers and I figure out what it has to be. And that's why I mentioned earlier that if you can find a tenant, a lease that has some rent increases along the way, your cash on cash return will improve over time. Non-recourse loans, there aren't many of them out there. If you're dealing with a credit tenant like an O'Reilly's or a Tractor Supply, and you're, they're really A+ investment grade, you might find some non-recourse financing because the tenant itself is so strong that they don't need to be recourse. South Florida is also bad. But Florida is another interesting exception. Florida has no state income tax. So what you do is developers will charge a premium for that because there is no state income tax. And also the entitlement fees for developers in Florida are very, very high. So it makes it a very costly state to buy net lease properties in, unless you live there and have lots of money and so forth. How do you feel about cigar shop as a tenant? I like medicinal marijuana places right now. I think those are the ones that I'd go for. New York is going to be legalizing it, and some states offer that. And it may not be a credit tenant, but on the other hand, there are a few large ones of those. And if it doesn't go against your politics, I think those are interesting higher cap rate tenants for sure. Cigar shop, I guess, I think, it's somewhat of a niche. So you want to make sure that the buyers in that area are cigar smokers, or they'll come there. Our multi-tenant, we have 1 national, 3 credit, and some all are good tenants. So I'm not sure how a cigar shop would fit into. Cell phone stores are also good. I think right now, Dock in a Box, essential businesses such as, urgent cares, dentists, those kinds of things, eye care, and maybe even tutors and things like that are probably good little shop tenants right now to consider.
We have a question from Bennett. How do you feel about dollar stores in tiny markets that are at low cap rates, which results in costs that are twice that of replacement cost?
Bennett, that's my bread and butter. Don't be making fun of those. In smaller markets, that's where your dollar stores like to go, because Walmart is not going to go there, and those guys need toilet paper, hand sanitizer, Kleenex, and milk. And a lot of those small town dollar stores do extremely well. However, the cap rates maybe are slightly better in a smaller market. Maybe you could get the same store at a 6 or a 6.25 cap rate in a small market, where it would be a 5.25 to a 5.5 in a larger market. I had a long discussion today with a client of mine that we asked the same question you just asked. And only thing I can think of is that like a Dollar General or a Family Dollar, they get more economies of scale when they have more locations. And so some locations they might break even, but having the economies of scale and process and merchandising and so forth makes it worthwhile for them to say, we're the world's largest small box retailer with 15,000 locations in 42 states. And that may be good for their stock. I don't know. There's got to be an answer to that, but I can't answer it. It's a good question, though.
Thank you. Do you see another question here from Darren? Do you see mom and pop strip malls getting triple net? How is the process? Leasing agent with contacts?
We're seeing a trend of maybe 7,500 square foot to maybe 15,000 square foot strips, not your huge malls, but those are they're creating them more as sort of like triple nets. And the tenants all pay in the pro rata share towards taxes, insurance, landscaping, CAM, all that stuff. We're seeing more and more of that. The question is to get a national credit tenant or a good regional tenant in there, like a Moe's or a Panera or a cell phone firm, a distributor. You probably need to go to a real estate firm that specializes in retail tenants. For you to try to do it as an individual, unless you have experience and have your own Rolodex, it's harder to do that. But there are a lot of companies that work regionally or nationally that can help. And of course, they get their commission and their fee in doing that as well. But when you know you're going to have a vacancy coming up, as much notice as you have as possible, and people usually write that in the leases that give us 6 months notice or whatever notice if you're not going to renew. As soon as you get that sense that they're going to do that, you immediately want to start looking for replacement tenants or figuring out what you want to do. You may have a tenant that needs more space, and if they're contiguous, maybe that's the opportunity to break through the wall and make a tenant bigger. I think we got all the questions.
Yeah, I think we did. Thank you so much, Nancy. That was a great interview and then a great Q&A.
Well, good. I'm glad. And, you all feel free to reach out to me and I'll get back with you as quick as I can if you have any questions. And it's just do your homework on all this stuff. And if your gut tells you something's good, go with it. If your gut tells you to be careful, listen to your gut. And somebody may tell you it's a good deal and blah, blah, blah. But if you don't feel like it's a good deal, don't act on it. And, just keep learning your specialty. It's really important.
Thank you.
Maybe a last question. I really enjoyed what you said, about become an expert, and that I think that's really on point. So you mentioned you have several partners. How did you choose them?
Well, some of my brother or my nephew. So okay. I might have found a property and I'll say to them, hey, you want to buy this? And they say to me, well, do you want to go in on it with me? In other words, they think if I want to go in on it and I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is, it must be good. So that often happens. But some of the partners that I have in some of the other properties, they're lifelong friends. I went to college with some of them and we know each other. And we've had, we've bought some residential properties that turned out that we bought them too soon. And if we had kept them a year or two later, we would have made out like bandits, but we didn't. And I could write a book on some of those residential stories, literally, with pit bull fights and tenants and this and that and the other unbelievable stories, which I'm sure all of you on the call have those as well.
That'd be a fun call one day.
Oh my God. I couldn't, but nobody except somebody who is a landlord or has experienced it could even begin to appreciate it. I mean, it would be, somebody would not believe them. But yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
This was awesome. This was absolutely great. You had mentioned if people have questions, they can reach out to you.
Yeah.
If you want to.
The email is probably the best way, Logan. It's easy. Nancy at Bull, B as in boy, ULLrealty.com. And just give me a general blurb about what your question is, or if you want to chat, and leave a phone number, and then we'll make a time. I've been blessed with being so busy at the moment that I can't do anything spur of the moment, but I'm glad to have you reach out, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. And, these guys found me from our website, CREshow.com, www.CREshow.com. And if you go to that website and you'll plug in your interest, my broker who owns the firm has been doing a commercial real estate show for probably 9 or 10 years now. And he has really very good guests on all the different property types that everybody on the call is interested in. And also about lenders and trends and this, that, and the other. You can get a wealth of knowledge. There's some video and podcasts. If you Google me, not Google, but search mine, you could find a bunch. I've done about maybe 15 or so of those. But there are many others. There's medical, there's industrial, there's apartment, you name it. And it's really, really good stuff. So that's a great resource for you to have no cost, of course, to.
Yeah, great podcast. Michael has a great voice too.
Yeah. Yes, he does. He does. He sings too.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
Right.
Nancy, I put both of those in the chat, your email, just if you want to check and make sure that's correct, just so everybody has that.
Let me find it. Let me go down.
At the very bottom.
All right. Yeah, that's great. And they're podcasts and videos, and they're on iTunes and, YouTube and all that stuff. We have a YouTube channel. And our website at bullrealty.com, you can see examples of different properties for sale. And we're more of a regional company. I have more stuff outside the region than most folks. But one of our folks, those of you who like medical, Paul Zeman is our medical guy. And he's a major heavy hitter in the industry. And we've got a couple folks that are apartment specialists and that are quite good at that as well. So in industrial, we don't have as much going on there as we could and we should. But Atlanta's become a very hot industrial market, primarily because of the movie industry, where, they're building all over. They're taking an old Ford plant about 3 miles from my house and converting it into the largest movie studio in the world. It'll be huge. Mostly for online gaming, for gaming, not even for video and all that stuff.
Wow.
Anyway, so thank you, and good luck to all of you in your investing.
Thank you, Nancy.
And if Arlene, if you would not mind sending me the link to the podcast, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When I can't sleep at night, I'll just play it and I'll bore myself to death.
No, this was phenomenal. I think everybody there was good.
Okay. So. Well, thanks. And have fun with this, guys. It's supposed to be fun too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye, Nancy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Logan. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the show tonight. And we look forward to seeing you next time for a new episode of the True Commercial Real Estate Podcast.